guests. Welcome to another edition of a conversation with El-Hajj Maurice Salakan. Alhamdulillah, for this afternoon's conversation, we have with us a very special guest, someone who is very, very special to me, both she and her family. Our sister, Hena Zuberi, is an independent journalist. She serves as editor-in-chief of MuslimMatters.org, and she is the director of the U.S.-based Justice for All organization. And I should also note that she wears a couple of even more important hats. She is a wife. She is a mother. She is the principal teacher of her young. She has a beautiful family, and she also serves on the board of directors for the Aafia Foundation. And there's something else very distinctive about our sister Hena. While your brother Salakan, who has been very passionate about this case, as many of you who have followed our work are aware, I'm often asked, have you met Aafia? And I have never met Dr. Aafia Siddiqui. I know her family very well, both in Pakistan and her brother and here in the United States, but I've never met her. Our sister Hena Zuberi has the unique distinction of having met her when they were both students in Boston and even worked under her during a period of that time. So with that said, welcome Sister Hena Zuberi to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Maurice Salakan. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, Brother Mori. It's a pleasure to be here with you and on your program. This is something amazing that Salam Media has done. They couldn't have had a better host than you.
Alhamdulillah. I am truly pleased and honored that they extended the invitation to me to serve as a host for a program on their network. Mm-hmm. We're going to try to make the best out of it, inshallah ta'ala. Try to cram as much human rights thought and activity into this broadcast as we possibly can, for as long as we can, inshallah. Today, again, this is a committed Muslimah who wears a number of hijabs. Wife, mother, human rights advocate, independent journalist. She has her hands in a number of fires. We're going to talk about a number of things, and I definitely want to, before the broadcast ends, be able to touch upon anything of importance to you, Sister Hena, that we don't cover in these areas of initial focus. Mm-hmm. Our sister Hena and the organization that she is with has been very involved in the issues around our brothers and sisters who are suffering from the country known as Burma and also as Myanmar. She has been involved and continues to be involved in the issues affecting our brothers and sisters who are known as Uyghurs, this Turkic ethnic group out of Central and East Asia. And of course, she has also had her eyes and concern wrapped around what's been happening in Kashmir. So in alphabetical order, we want to talk about these three areas of the world and get you to give us as much update information as you can on what's happening right now on the ground in these three places. I know all three of them are very difficult areas to discuss because of the secrecy and the wall of silence that enwraps these areas, but as best as you possibly can, let's begin in alphabetical order with Kashmir. What can you tell us, Sister Hena, about what's happening on the ground there, especially given the fact that we're not hearing anything at all now in the mainstream media or even in the alternative media? I haven't been hearing anything.
Bismillah. Yes, you're absolutely right. The spotlight that was on Kashmir a couple of months ago is definitely dimmed. And in that darkness, things are happening that are so atrocious that it really, in the history of the 70-year-old struggle, and even perhaps even longer than that, that Kashmiris have struggled with, this is a time where those nefarious agendas that had been put into place is now bearing fruit for the oppressors. So as everybody knows, for the past 70 years and more, Kashmir has been, which is an international territory, disputed territory, has been occupied. And at this point, they are in lockdown under a lockdown. So they have been in a lockdown since August, when the Article 370 was revoked. And after that, they still even under this pandemic, even under a time where majority of us are getting information from our phones, from our laptops, on how to keep safe under this pandemic, the Kashmiri people still to this day do not have internet access, that basic ability to access information, and it's so detrimental to their hospitals. They're not able to, I've read reports where they're not able to download instructions on how to treat patients in ICUs. They're not able to communicate to each other the information that most of us, like just even watching a YouTube video on how to make a face mask, or just little things that we take for granted.
Yeah.
But all of this seems to dim in the light of the news that India has issued a new domicile law in Kashmir, and which essentially gives the right to to residency, and the right to certain jobs that before were just reserved for Kashmiris, the indigenous people of the land, are now given to the same oppressors who had been serving in the army. Now, if they have been in Kashmir for 7 years, 15 years, there are certain levels, they can start now acquiring property, apply for jobs, get jobs, and be able to be looked at as, their designation will become residents. And this is terrifying. This was the goal, was to change the demographic of the land. So it becomes from a majority Muslim region to a minority Muslim region. And obviously then at that time, even if the plebiscite or any other sort of decision is to be made about Kashmir, would not be able to, the results would be totally biased because of these new people who are now suddenly given residency. So this domicile law, and it's been sneaked under in the time during a pandemic, where the whole world's energies are going towards saving lives in their own countries. Here in Kashmir, the Kashmiri people are having to not just fight for their lives, but also for the ability to live in their land. And we have to remember the Kashmiri economy is very fragile. The ecology of the land is very fragile. So now we have timber merchants coming in. Just the whole landscape is changing. And yes, so this is...
Now, what exactly is Article 317?
So Article 370.
Oh, 370, I'm sorry.
Was in, so there was an understanding with the government of India that the Kashmiri people had under leadership, and some agreed with that article and some disagreed with it, because majority of Kashmiris want freedom. They want to be determine their own destiny. They want to be able to decide who will rule them by themselves, and they do not accept India's rule, and some of them don't accept Pakistan's rule. So Article 370 in the Indian region, occupied region of Kashmir, was an article that gave Kashmiris special rights. That was they were treated as not. They shared some areas of government relations with the central government in India, for example, foreign relations, and I don't have it on top of my mind. There were two other things that they could they shared with the central government, but everything else was under Kashmiri law. So, for example, the changes that you can see now is that the universities are not under Kashmiri law. So, for example, Kashmiris were allowed full tuition all the way till their masters, free tuition, that they could go to their universities without paying. So that has been taken away. Now, radio channels that used to be called Radio Kashmir now have been renamed as Indian channels. So a lot has changed, and the way the government is being run. So essentially, the government of India has made Kashmir yet another state of India, instead of the autonomous region that it was still considered under Article 370. Of course, keeping in mind the Kashmiris have always wanted their own, be able to self-govern themselves. So keeping that in mind, so 370 was not a perfect solution by any means, and but now at this point in history, the whole notion of Kashmir as a separate entity from India has been dissolved under 370, under the taking back of 370.
Indeed, and it's important. I think it's very important for those of us who have any feeling about what has been taking place in occupied Kashmir, and especially for those who are new to the awareness of this conflict. I mean, this is, as you stated earlier, over 7 decades old. I mean, this is a conflict, an occupation based conflict that is as old as the occupation of occupied Palestine. In fact, they both unfolded around the same time. And but while we have the world has heard much about the torment and torture taking place in the Middle East, not many members of the global community are as aware of what has been taking place in Kashmir along this same unfortunate timeline.
I do want to mention. I do want to mention that this was a special status for Jammu as well as Kashmir.
Yeah.
So whole Jammu region as well. I did not want to leave them out in anything. Inshallah.
And if I'm not mistaken, aren't there 3 countries that that have stakes in this conflict, in addition to India and its occupation? There's also Pakistan, and then, if I'm not mistaken, China also.
Yes, China holds a portion of the region that is called Kashmir, and that's the dispute. That's the map of when you look at the map of disputed Kashmir region, it shows on the Chinese administered Kashmir is towards the extreme east, and that region, a lot of it is uninhabitable, but it is occupied by China.
Yeah. Okay, now let's go from there to what has been happening with our brothers and sisters in Burma, Myanmar. our Rohingya brothers and sisters. What is the latest on that unfortunate tragedy? What's going on, Sister Hena?
So as it's a horrific situation, as you can imagine, and especially with this pandemic. We were several agencies, such as Save the Children, is on the ground over there. There has been one known case of COVID-19 in the camps. Currently, Bangladesh has also pulled a move very similar to what India has done in Kashmir and has removed mobile access from the Rohingya refugees.
Subhanallah.
So, and this was the only way. Now imagine these refugees have no access to information, no access to, and this was the way they would keep in touch with each other, keep in track with any relatives that might be in overseas. So currently, no mobile data whatsoever. Now imagine life today under that. Then the Bangladeshi government also stated to NGOs on the ground that they need not, quote unquote, cause panic in the camps. So no education should be done about COVID-19 or the coronavirus, as it's commonly known, in the camps. So imagine for those not seeing anything and then suddenly seeing people in masks and gloves showing up in the camp. So panic obviously spread.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And especially without any. So what NGOs were doing at that point was essentially taking little rickshaws and megaphones, and just making announcements throughout the streets. Because people were still coming to the medical camps to get for small, complaints, and they wanted them to keep, how do you practice social distancing
Right.
in a refugee camp where you're all living in a tent in a tiny small place? So there were before this pandemic spread, there were plans and which had been starting to be executed around the camp where they were putting up barbed wires. Now you have to remember that Bangladesh to this day has not given the refugees refugee status. So they are still called displaced people. They are not given refugee status, because if they were given refugee status, then Bangladesh would be obligated to educate them, to let them go free into the country. And Bangladesh does not want this. And at this point, many Rohingya refugees are also very tired. It's been 2.5 years since they have been in these camps. They want to go back home. At first, their call was full citizenship and safety and security, but many are falling to the wayside with the first call for full citizenship. They're ready to take those cards. Some of them, not all of them, many of them are still calling for the fight for full citizenship because they believe they will not be safe back in Burma without full citizenship. They already weren't. So they are ready to take the cards that the Burmese government is willing to issue to them and go back. However, there is no international organization that can protect them. It is a very precarious situation still at this point, and every refugee that you talk to just wants to go back home, but a lot of them don't realize that their homes don't exist anymore, that the Burmese military has built military facilities on many of over their villages. So this is one thing. In Cox's Bazar, currently there's one ventilator for all the region of Cox's Bazar, one ventilator. We have been, so Justice for All as an advocacy organization has been pushing for additional aid. We have been asking the US government, because the US and Canadian government have made major investments. If you look at this capitalist system, if you just want to put it in their terminology, they've invested in these camps. hundreds, millions of dollars. In the beginning, when we started our work, only $30 million was being invested, was given aid by the USAID, by the US State Department. But through advocacy, that aid has been increased to about $600 million, which goes as, direct bilateral aid, as well as other forums. So even if they look at this from an investment perspective, the United States and the Canadian government need to protect their investment and pressure the Bangladeshi government to allow mobile data access to the Rohingya refugees, so they can protect themselves from this under this pandemic.
Now, is there anything any organization within the United Nations can do? Because when we talk about refugee status, official refugee status, I mean, it shouldn't, from my, limited thinking, it shouldn't be just left solely to the Bangladeshi government. I mean, this is an issue of international law, well-established international law.
Unfortunately, it is on the host country, on what legal status they give to.
Okay, it's on the host country. Okay.
So, so UNHCR, so the refugees that have been able to come through the UNHCR to, for example, the United States or South Africa or Malaysia, Indonesia, anywhere in the world where Rohingya refugees have settled, they were able to do so because they had refugee status in that country. Currently, Rohingyas do not have passports. They cannot travel. So they cannot, even if a Rohingya family was based in Malaysia and wanted to sponsor their family living in Kutupalong in the camps to come to one of these countries, many of them do not have passports. So when we look at borders and we look at displacement, a lot of times these nuances are lost. What passport would they travel under?
Mm-hmm.
And then at this time when all borders are closed, walls are being built when we never thought they never thought we'd be building walls. So this is something that is extremely concerning. Our biggest concern right now is that under this threat of COVID-19, that there is not enough PPE, protective gear, for aid workers. So aid workers are not going in. When a crisis like this hits, donations stop coming in. It's Ramadan is coming, and many of the charity organizations who work on this cause, if you talk to them, they'll say that people are more concerned to save, because there's such a need locally that far off places get. And then you will also see recently the boat people phenomena was happening again, where Malaysia had rejected boats that were coming in, leaving from Myanmar. So all of this is terribly concerning. There was a bright burst of light, hope sparked when Gambia took the court case to the ICJ, and we were expecting the outcomes to not come out for 2 years, but the case was so strong that within 3 months. So we are on our end. There is currently nobody monitoring what if Burma is being compliant with ICJ directives. So that is some of the work that we're doing at Burma Task Force, which is run by Justice for All, is that we are on a monthly basis looking at the data that is coming out and making sure that the ICJ is aware of what compliance is being done. The US Congress is aware, Canadian MPs are aware, as well as the United Nations is aware of what compliance has taken place. Because
I want to be clear on something that you just said. Do I understand you saying that a decision was rendered by the court within a 3-month period?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So preemptive decision was given, and the Burmese government was issued orders to protect the Rohingya that are still. People a lot of times forget that the Rohingya are still in Burma. aside from the million or so that are in the camps and the ones that are in the diaspora, there are Rohingyas still in concentration camps currently right now in Burma, who do not have access to anything, no medicine, no fruit, no food. And under this pandemic, God knows what is happening. SubhanAllah, sometimes just the thought of it sends chills down your spine, where people who have been kept in these situations, sometimes other places, we still get some, there are citizen journalists, and they're still able to send some information out to the world. But in Burma and in East Turkestan, both these places, the absence of information coming from the ground is what is terrifying, because it is in the same with the Uyghur population. At least up till pre-COVID, we were still getting information from Urumqi. We were still, like, through our Uyghur partners and through citizen activists in the border between Uzbekistan and East Turkestan, which I use the word East Turkestan. I do not like to use Xinjiang, known as Xinjiang, because, as I have learned from my Uyghur brothers and sisters, that is the name that they call their country by. They believe they are occupied by China, and they encourage all Muslim brothers and sisters to not use the word Xinjiang, just as we do not call Palestine Israel, to call East Turkestan Xinjiang.
Okay, before we leave, our Rohingya brothers and sisters, and segue into the crisis still engulfing our Uyghur brothers and sisters. One last question with regard to the Bangladeshi government. What is the official rationale they give for the measures they've taken? Not the least of which, and one of the most important, being to cut them off from being able to communicate with the outside, with families on the outside of the camps. What rationale do they give for this?
So, and I do not want to be negative towards the Bangladeshi government, because despite being a very, very poor country, they have been so hospitable to the Rohingya people. So this is something that, as we acknowledge the wrong a government does, we have to acknowledge the good they have done. So keeping that goodness aside, they have hosted, despite being one of the poorest countries in the world, with several natural disasters, flooding occurring every year, and it being extremely populated. And the fact that even the camps themselves, if you look at aerial footage, the camps have destroyed ecology in that area. Forests, the forests have been cut down to make room for 1 million people. There has been a lot of, shall we say, negativity or clashes between the local population and the Rohingya population. So, as you know, in a time like this, when you do not have a sustainable way of earning a living, then nefarious activities do occur, and no one is saying that they don't. But what has happened is one or two of these nefarious activities have gained, all of us are WhatsApp experts on everything, right? So when that starts spreading, and it starts spreading throughout the country, and then people such as the Rohingya become easy scapegoats for any missteps by the government, and so that is one of the biggest reasons I feel like they felt like this was the only way to control the population, that all of this, the negativity, that's why the barbed wires were going up, They did not, many Rohingya were leaving the camps and coming out into, obviously, how long can you stay in those situations? People will go leave the camps to look for a way to earn a living. And so that is, I believe, what the excuse that is being used is to curb crime and to curb potential clashes between the local population and the Rohingya population.
Okay. Now, our brothers and sisters in East Turkestan, what's going on there? What update information can you give us concerning the plight of our brothers and sisters, especially in those terrible camps?
So one,
go ahead.
We thought the camps were bad enough, but there's not enough focus being put on the fact that many of the brothers and sisters that were in the camps are now being transferred over to prisons that are much worse than the camps. Because they want to empty out the camps to put new people in. The other thing that is happening is many of these brothers and sisters have been taken in trains into mainland China, where they are being forced to work in factories, forced labor, enslaved labor, especially. This is something that is, as I can speak for the United States. So 80% of the cotton that comes out of China comes from East Turkestan, the Xinjiang region. 80% of the cotton. So imagine if you own, and 30% of the import of all cotton into the United States, 30% is from China. So that would mean if you own cotton clothes, 1 out of 7 is made by enslaved labor of our Uyghur brothers and sisters. So this is a terrible reality. And reports have been released that name at least 100 major organizations, major corporations like Nike, like Adidas, like H&M, lots of and I truly believe, like now when we're in this lockdown and nobody's at the malls and nobody really is buying anything, this is a call from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like really have to understand the spiritual element. When we don't work hard enough, when we cannot stop ourselves from buying that one more t-shirt or one more sneakers that would have been made by an enslaved brother and sister of ours, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to step in. How long can he let that rope go, right?
Yeah.
So, but this is a reality, and it's a continued reality, that the supply chain that supplies most of our items that we use, consumer goods, because many countries are importing from China, they are being made by these brothers and sisters that were in the camps. Now they have been transferred over into mainland China. Their children are still in orphanages. Their wives are at home with a non-mahram man, Chinese man who is a communist, who are atheists. I just need to say these things because a lot of times people forget. When they talk about communism, they forget that communism is an atheist ideology, right? And these men are living in the homes with our sisters, and this is state-sanctioned rape across the region. I hope people who are listening understand what I'm saying. Yes, this is state-sanctioned rape. When a member of the Communist Party, you are obligated to host them in your home as your husband. As your husband. There are pictures that have come out of rooms and bedrooms where you have to share all your personal space with this man, even and female members of the Communist Party coming in, and this is now your mother or your mother-in-law, and you have to live with them, and they report back to the the main, the center, what you are doing, what you are thinking. So, Brother Mori, suppose, subhanAllah, how many times in a day we sit and we just think about Allah, right? Just
Yeah.
quietly ponder.
Mm-hmm.
If you were there, you would not be able to do that, because that Chinese Communist Party member who is in your home would come and ask you, what are you doing? Are you thinking about Allah? Are you thinking about your God? You are not even allowed to think under this.
Yeah.
So this is the state of what is happening in Xinjiang. So imagine the state inside the concentration camps. Imagine the state inside prisons,
Mm-hmm.
where there's torture, rape, consistent. And imagine the state of these brothers and sisters who are being forced to work in these factories just to supply us shoes that cost $10 less than the ones that were made in, fair trade certified facility somewhere.
Now, in the work that you all have been doing in the realm of government to government relations and what have you, has there been any progress there around this issue in East Turkestan?
So inshallah, alhamdulillah. So I'm going to give you want good news or you want bad news?
We need some good news.
Okay. So good news. So the good news is, for the first time in history, there are 3, and I believe a 4th one is in the works, 4 bills in the US Congress specifically about the Uyghur cause. And we understand. So people often say, oh yeah, Trump is just using this because of the trade war. We understand what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
But this is, again, all of us we have to come from this from a spiritual stance. Allah uses whom He wills.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using the Republicans in the United States Congress and Senate to do the work that the Muslims have not been able to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so these laws would, for example, if one of the laws is to have sanctions on Chinese party officials, and you have to remember, many of them and their children come to study in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
right? To have sanctions on them so they are not able to come, to protect the Uyghurs who are living in the United States from spying, because they're being spied on over here, from threats, so that is part of the bill. Part of the bill, which actually it passed Senate, then it passed the House, but the House wanted to make it stronger. So when the House made it stronger, they came to a standstill. But it has passed both. So the new version of the bill has to be debated now. COVID brought a lot of things into, changed a lot of things. But the fact that the House Foreign Relations Committee has called for strict measures against China. This other new bill about forced labor would make before the impetus was on the border patrol to say if a shipment that was coming in was made with forced labor or not. Like, they had to prove. Now the burden of the proof is on companies. Under this law, it would be on companies that they have to prove whether that they are not using forced labor.
Okay.
So, and then some of the hearings of the China Commission in the United States have moved forward. Some of the findings about forced labor has been adopted into the language. So this is extremely powerful. A lot of labor unions, a lot of labor unions, amazing workers' rights unions have joined this fight. So now this fight is not just a Muslim fight. It's just not a Uyghur fight. It is a fight that has been joined in by, and that's what happens. Things happen when you bring in different people. So a coalition has been formed of people who understand that this is a much bigger problem than just a religious or an ethnic problem. So alhamdulillah. So that,
alhamdulillah. Yeah.
We'll take whatever good news comes, right?
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
The bad news is that recently, as you know, the United States has left we are living under a potential dictatorship as well. So the United States has left the United Nations Human Rights Council.
Right.
In that vacuum, China has now been elected to be one of the members by
Mm-hmm.
the Pacific Group.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody in those countries who is listening to me, this is on you. Your governments in the Asia Pacific region decided that China would be responsible for electing. So now this is really, like, for us, it's a really bad crossroads, because we were hoping a special rapporteur would be appointed for the Uyghur issue in the United Nations Human Rights Council. But
Mm-hmm.
this crushes all hopes of this. With China
Mm-hmm.
responsible for indigenous people's rights. So China
Mm-hmm.
will decide, who, along with five other member states, who gets to be those experts that will be special rapporteurs
Mm-hmm.
on freedom of expression. China, remember that, where
Mm-hmm.
nothing, you cannot express anything without the Chinese Communist Party approval. And they will be responsible for indigenous rights. And I believe there's one more thing that they're responsible. I feel like sometimes we're in some twilight zone sometimes.
Twilight Zone, yes. I was thinking of the same thing. That, subhanallah, there's a double irony, you know. I mean, it was an irony with the United States given its unfortunate record, despite its claim of being a republic founded on liberty and justice for all, being on that council, and now being replaced by China with all the baggage that it is bringing into that seat. My dear sister, we are at the end of the program, but I want to give you a couple of minutes to just touch upon anything else of that you feel of importance that you would like to bring to the attention of our international listenership. Uh,
Alhamdulillah. So thank you so much for having me on this.
Alhamdulillah.
One thing that I will say to all our readers, all of them, so please support Muslim media. Please support Muslim-run media. Today, a lot of us have become a lot of sort of okay with not supporting Muslim media, because many times mainstream non-Muslim publications have now started covering our issues, or they will give voice to, give our voices a platform. But this was not always the case. It wasn't the case 10 years ago. And at any moment, it could change.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, Muslims are the darlings of the media because it brings hits. Anytime Islamophobia or anti-Muslim bigotry, any of those stories, they go viral. So that's why you are, a force that brings something back to the table. So anytime the liberal media could turn against you, right? So what do we do then? We have to fortify our own media platforms. Wherever you are, in whatever country, build them up to get to that level of professionalism, right? Obviously, we don't want to spread fake news or anything like that. That is a part of our tradition as well. So, but to have authentic quality coverage, this is so important. Independent, not dependent on anybody except to the people that we're serving and to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is something that I really, I push for this. I ask people to support it wherever you are. If you are a writer yourself, you're a blogger yourself, keep doing the work that you're doing, because you don't understand, like, it's with the internet, it's made everybody, it's such a democratic place, if you want to call
Yes.
it, right? So
It has definitely democratized information. Yes, it has.
it has. So let's not be dependent on anybody else except for ourselves. So that is one thing that I really want to emphasize. Let your children go into these fields, and we especially practicing, Muslims who really follow, like, the justice, the spirit of qist, that establishing of justice and fairness and equality. This is something that is a part of our deen. A lot of times we talk about hijab, we talk about important. Fasting, Ramadan, all of this, alhamdulillah, these are the basics of our deen. But when will we evolve from the basics, right? When will we come to a point where each of our children are taught to stand up for justice? A lot of these calamities that have come upon us, these are trials. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing us. And we cannot separate our spiritual activism from our worldly, like where we live, right? What we are doing, what is happening to the ummah. A lot of times we forget that we are still a part of the ummah. We've been taught like, oh, American Muslims, South African Muslims, and yes, we need to build our bases and be a fortified community. But especially the South African community, we learned so much from you. We learned so much from you, especially during the apartheid and what your grandfathers, your parents may have gone through. But now we need this new generation to also be at that level, and be with us on this fight for justice for the oppressed of our ummah. They need us. Who else will do this work? Who else?
Yes. Well, my dear sister Hena Zuberi, I couldn't think of a better way to end this conversation than with that kind of heartfelt nasiha coming from someone who just doesn't talk the talk but walks the walk. I'm grateful to be able to call you my sister in Islam, and I am also very pleased to have been able to have you as you're the third guest for this new series of conversations. So alhamdulillah, thank you very much. And I remind my brothers and sisters in Islam that yes, indeed, we do have a responsibility, as our sister just pointed out, to, in the words of the Quran, stand firmly for justice as witnesses, even if it be against ourselves. And, our beloved Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he said, when you see an evil action, you must change it with your hand. If you cannot do so with your tongue, the jihad of the tongue, if you cannot do so, detest it within your heart, and that is the weakest degree of faith. And something else that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said was that one of the greatest jihads is to speak truth to a governing authority that is deviated from the right way. Speak truth. If not speaking it with the tongue, speaking it with the written word. Information is power. When the information is based on truth, and it's correctly directed, it's a powerful force. So we thank those of you who joined us live for this conversation over Salam Media, and for those of you who will see it later on, we ask Allah Ta'ala to give barakah to the efforts being made, and to make it a benefit to each and every one that it touches in the course of time, inshallah ta'ala. Thank you, my sister Hena Zuberi. May Allah Ta'ala bless you and your family, and I'm sure that we will communicate on a number of occasions before the end of Ramadan, but I'm going to ask in advance that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala bless this upcoming month of ours, which is going to be a very, very a uniquely engaged month of Ramadan for us all. May Allah Ta'ala bless us to come out of this month more committed, more healthy, much stronger than we were when we entered it. Ameen.
Amen.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.